You missed some important news from the LGBTQ plus community this week. To ensure you are current, we are recapping that important news. Here's what you may have missed. Texas may penalize drag shows with a $10,000 fine for being erotic, abnormal, and shameful.
Senate Bill 12 changes the definition of sexually oriented performances to include male performers acting as female and female performers acting as men that are sexual. It would effectively ban children from attending drag shows, and business owners can't allow a sexually oriented performance to happen with kids under the age of 18. Violators would face a civil penalty of up to $10,000. Senate Bill 1601 would take funding away from public libraries, host events where people dress as the opposite gender. But opponents say these bills vilify drag queens, further marginalizing them.
And drag is a form of art, and like any form of art, it can be modified for children. There are going to be drag shows where we do not want kids in the shows, okay? We're not trying to say that all drag is good for kids. We're trying to say there are appropriate times that drag is modified to be safe for kids.
There are certainly Broadway shows, my goodness, Peter Pan. Before any of us were born, this lady named Sandy Duncan,
yes,
a female, played Peter Pan. There's no prurient interest that doesn't comply under the statute to be covered by a bill like this, if that's helpful.
And supporters of the bill say this is about protecting children. And again, that testimony is still happening. It's happening right behind us with almost 100 people scheduled to testify on both bills. So we're going to be here for a while. Back to you, Bryan and Ashley.
Well, the Texas Senate has advanced bills restricting certain drag shows. During last week's committee hearing, dozens of drag performers and their allies testified against these bills, outnumbering significantly the bill's supporters. Opponents of legislation also said the Republican-led efforts to criminalize certain drag performances were attacks on Texans' First Amendment rights, while others said the legislation took away Texas parents' rights to decide what content or culture their children are exposed to. On the other side, the smaller contingent of bill's supporters say the legislation is needed to protect children from sexually explicit materials. Filed by Republican State Senator Bryan Hughes of Mineola, Texas, SB 12 would impose a $10,000 fine on business owners who host drag shows in front of children, if those performances are sexually oriented. The bill defines a sexually oriented performance as one in which someone is naked or in drag and, quote, appeals to the prurient interest in sex, end quote. The U.S. Supreme Court defines prurient interest as, quote, erotic, lascivious, abnormal, unhealthy, degrading, shameful, or morbid interest in nudity, sex, or excretion, end quote. Compared to several of the Republican proposals that seek to restrict drag shows, including Senate Bill 476 that Hughes previously filed, SB 12 seems to scale down the proposed restriction on drag shows, but performers and their allies said that the bill's language is still exceptionally vague. That gets it. First, the issue here is the severity of the fine being left vaguely. He's done the Ron DeSantis playbook page. Let's make it vague and we'll get the law passed, and then we'll redefine it and really kill them with the club that we'll hit them with later. Yeah. And that's what's happening here in terms of the watered down version. The other moment that is really very significant in this legislation is that they're defining the interpretation of drag on the Supreme Court's decision of what prurient definition of sexual offense is. All of those words that I just told you is the definition that the Supreme Court uses in what is sexually offensive. Now they're going to have this gigantic leap to try to say, well, we're using the Supreme Court's already defined prurient definition, and now we're saying drag meets the prurient definition of sexual explicit, of being sexually explicit. They are not true. It's not true, but it is a very sophisticated and likely in Texas, a very creative and successful way to make drag illegal under this definition.
Not only drag, but it's also an attack on our trans community. Do you think that a Republican can tell the difference between a drag queen and a trans woman? Absolutely not.
No.
And so they're endangering not only the lives of drag performers, but of trans people in general in that state.
And it's
scary.
And it's also a slippery slope when it comes down to entertainment in the LGBTQ plus community at large. Because now it's up for debate whether or not Go-Go Boys or any of the entertainment that we put on is of sexually explicit nature. So this is a very dangerous bill in order to make a description of what sexually explicit materials is as this.
Yeah.
And the legislators comment or question in there that, well, what about Peter Pan? Well, no, Peter Pan can still obviously get through. So it's only prurient when it's people from the LGBTQ plus community. If it's a straight person doing it and they've heard of it before, then it's still okay.
Yeah, the description is just awful. I mean, come on, that we've all been to a drag show, all right? And lascivious, excretion.
You're in the absence of a drag king.
Exactly. It's an art, it's a talent, it's something that you're entertaining people for and with. And what I will call out are our LGBTQ plus defenders that are out there showing who they are, not afraid to shine their light. And like you said, Al, there were more of them than the Republicans and the right-wing people there, So we've got to show up, stand up, and protest wherever possible so they can see there is strength in numbers, and you showed it right there.
Yeah, and one last thought before we move to Jamal. It's sad the crazier this gets, but also at the end of the day, while it'll have to be fought through, the better it is. Because at the end of the day, the point of the interpretation of who is the violator, could Peter Pan get through? Peter Pan can't get through.
No.
Because if they say it's okay for Peter Pan, or the joke about Dolly Parton, you know how much money it costs to look this cheap?
Right.
I am a drag queen. The joke that Dolly Parton makes, or Peter Pan, has to interpret the law exactly the same way. Because when these challenges go through the federal courts, eventually all the way to the Supreme Court, the challenge is going to be equal protection under the law. Either it's all or none. They'll lose. They'll eventually lose at the Supreme Court. But the harm that's going to take place is going to be dramatic. And then they're eventually going to lose. Keep watching the only television news in the world from our LGBTQ plus community, and stay informed on everything that is important for and about our diverse LGBTQ plus community.